In the old days, when there was no government grant and you thought something was true and you found out it was a lie, you could switch terms and you go and research something else. But now you've got a government grant. And if you expose that it's not right, if you have questions it's not right, then you lose your grant. And you lose, and then your staff gets fired. You can't maintain your university professorship. I mean, the system is set up to continue the lie. I'm just going to say, because they only fund the narrative they want to be funded. That's part of what's going on here. And I mean, that's a big part of what's going on here.
Hey guys, this week we had some technical difficulties in our studio. We are actually going to just post a rerun of our episode with Dr. Merritt. It's been one of our most popular episodes, and we just thought we'd release it this week. We have some big interviews coming up here. We have Alec Zeck coming up on Thursday that we're going to release next week. And then also Katie Collins here this week we're interviewing, and that will be the week after after Alec. But basically, we're going to be talking about our episode on the High Wire. If you haven't watched that, I encourage you to tune in on the High Wires episode, basically where we debated, the germ theory and the virology flaws and whatnot. And if you didn't tune into that, if you're new to that, that whole argument, basically in a nutshell, there's a lot of corruption, layers and layers and layers of lies that are built on really virology and the germ theory. Again, there's a little bit of truth to both, but again, germs are not the sole cause of disease. Germs do cause issues, especially if they get into the vascular system of the body, but it's not to be blamed on the sole cause of all disease. And then, Alec can articulate really the flaws with virology probably better than I can, but really the truth of the matter is there's a lot of lies around viruses. And so we are trying to get to the bottom of that. So if you're new to this, welcome to our podcast. You guys have been amazing. We love all the support. We love all the people that have reached out and said that they're listening and tuning in. So it's been a lot of fun. I never really thought that this podcast would get the attention that it's getting, but we love it. It's awesome. And it's because of you guys. So if you want to support this podcast, you can go to the link on my Instagram, link in my X account. You can support us on our locals page for a cost of basically 1 cup of coffee. You can help this podcast keep growing. So guys, we just really want to extend a thank you to you for all your support and love. And please share this podcast. God bless. To August of last year, nobody really knew who I was.
There's about 12 people who are producing 65% of anti-vaccine misinformation.
We need to come together as Americans and realize that we have a war at hand here. Right?
Like, dude, how scared of this shit do you have to be to be wearing gloves, a face shield, and a mask at this point?
Help us to urge folks and say to them, look, it's time to roll up your sleeve and get the shot.
Chiropractor in Omaha, Nebraska, responsible for 65% of the anti-vaccine misinformation. Put what I say to the test. Just don't write me off as crazy misinformation.
Doctor, please bring yourself in order.
600,000 people will die of cancer. 300,000 people will die of obesity this year. When is enough enough?
Well, how the heck are you, Doc?
Hey, good. Nice to see you, man. It's been a long time. A lot of water under the bridge since you and I went down to just try and stop the mask mandate.
Oh, well.
Yeah, you're chewing nicotine gum.
Hey, maybe that can start off our conversation. Well, it's good to see you, Doc. I'm just, I'm so thankful to be sitting down with you. I have so much respect for you, and you've been one of my favorite people, especially that, like you said, the old kicking off against the mask mandate here, So, well, how you been? What have you been up to these days?
Well, the big thing that I have been fighting, I mean, obviously, since you and I first got together, the biggest thing, by the way, are we recording now?
Oh yeah, we're diving in. We're just going.
Oh, we're just diving in. Okay.
We're just diving in. That's how
Right. Well, I kind of thought that. So, since you and I started, I went down, I'm just going to recap that because I'm just thinking how far we've come. When I went down to speak about the mask mandate in Omaha, and it was just you and me against the entire University of Nebraska
right.
crowd. I knew something was really wrong because I knew they couldn't be all missing the mountain of literature on masks, right? But what I didn't appreciate at the time was that science in general, that we live in a Truman Show of science that the world has accepted. And we accept, and we're living in a matrix, really, that's true, not necessarily how the movie shows it to you, but a matrix of false scientific ideas. And that they keep us in a certain, like a jail, like a prison, because we believe them. And we believe them because, just like Truman, we were born into this world. I grew up my whole time in medicine. I heard about viruses, right? Who would not think there are viruses? But now we know they've lied about not just that, about everything. And so one of the things I've been trying to point out to people is, if we're going to get out of this, we have to understand what's happened to us. So one of the things I'm doing is I've got a series on Rumble now that I'm starting. I've only got a couple out, but I'm about to put out one on Charles Darwin, and it's about the false science and who proposed it. Who were these people? You look at Darwin's a perfect example. Regardless of what people want to think about evolution, when you look at Darwin himself as an individual and the story, it's so bizarre and so wrong. It can't be true as given to us, and here's a simple example. They show us all these pictures of these birds' beaks, and in this whole evolutionary argument, these beautiful pictures of birds' beaks and all these different things, as if Darwin drew them, right? Well, it turns out that in a 5-year voyage, first of all, he was not a scholar. He was a college dropout, medical school dropout, who could barely get a degree. He was not a famous botanist or anything. He was kind of like the family. We don't know what to do with this kid. I know we can sacrifice him to go for 5 years on this ship, but we can then use him to promote this idea of genetic evolution. And it was actually his grandfather, Erasmus Darwin, that really came up, among other people, that 100 years before came up with all this stuff. And they used Darwin to then be the figurehead. And this is what you see in science. You see figureheads. Another one, I think, is John Enders. John Enders is the father of what we call virology. But you look at how he proved anything, it's just not true. And then you look at his history, it's not right. His story, who he is, everything. It's just not right. And Einstein is another one. So these guys are all over the place. And when you start looking at them, they have a common lots of commonalities. Like, they tend to marry their first cousin. They tend to marry in the family. They come from these uber wealthy, special families that kind of have been controlling things. So I'm just picking some examples, but there are lots of them. And I think we can find lots of them as we go through here. So that's one of the things I'm saying. And we believe this world because we were born into it, and because I like the term complexification and crapification that one of the economists uses, Max Kaiser. And, it's about, they make things sounding very, very complicated, so we won't catch on.
Right.
And you've been at this for a long time, trying to make it simple. I mean, we don't have, as the ICD-9 index of diseases would have you believe, we don't have 70,000 different diseases. We have a few root causes of problems, and they don't want us to recognize those. And that's why we have this incredibly false scientific overlay on the world today. And until we get out of it, we're not going to figure out. And I'll just say a couple of things and I'll shut up. But one of the things I found out is, and I failed at this, and my whole generation of physicians failed at this and more, is that we just didn't read the technology. We read when you read science, it looks so complicated that we said, well, we'll leave that to the specialists. We'll leave that to the virologists and the statisticians and the people to sort out the middle part of that paper. We'll look at what they were trying to prove and who they had in their study, and maybe we'll look at a little bit of the analysis and the conclusion, but we didn't look at the technique. And when you start doing that, you realize, excuse my French, it's just all bullshit.
Right.
It isn't what they told us at all. And here's the important point, is that if you believe that there are these little flying unicorns that come out of my mouth, whatever we want to call them, they call them viruses, but if people want to believe that, and they come out of my mouth and they go over to you and make you sick, it's a wonderful anti-human agenda.
We'll be right back after a word for our sponsor. This episode is sponsored by Ezra Healing, a leader in the emerging wellness paradigm taking shape across North America and beyond. People everywhere are recognizing that the old sick care model, quick fixes, symptom chasing, and surface level solutions simply isn't enough. Ezra Healing is a part of the shift toward truly patient-centered care that prioritizes well-being, integrity, and a do-no-harm approach. At Ezra Healing, your whole lifestyle, rhythms, and patterns are considered to better support the interconnected systems of your body. They're focused on real solutions, long-term health promotion, and prevention, an evolving grassroots movement dedicated to helping individuals and families live healthier and more resilient lives. If you're ready for a wellness experience that puts humanity first, Ezra Healing is guiding the way. To learn more, visit them at www.ezrahealing.com. And now, back to the show.
And it makes you afraid of your fellow man. And it also makes you dependent on these doctors that only they can understand this stuff. When you realize that's a fraud and what they're doing is poisoning us, and that they've been poisoning us since time immemorial to keep the population down, or for whatever reason they're doing it, they've been poisoning us. And once you realize that, then the whole world changes. You know, why won't they want us to know the truth? Because if we realized we were being poisoned, we'd look for the poisoner.
Right.
You know, 100%. But if you think it's just this airborne random disease, these little viruses out there that can get into you and make you sick, then you just think, well, oh, you know, it just happens. It's just not that way. Right. That's really that's the big conclusion I've come to about the world. I mean, that's the big view, and then we can get down in the weeds a little bit in the smaller view.
Well, Doc, that's why we're sitting down together. That's why I love you. I mean, you just got a wealth of knowledge. I remember the first time we talked. I mean, you just were a wealth of knowledge, and really, I kind of felt bad because you called me and talked to me, and I was like, man, that lady's too much for me. And then
that was when I think I was trying to get you to get involved with me on something, and then I found out you'd already had a whole system set up for taking these guys on.
Yeah, and I remember I watched your lecture and I said, oh my goodness, this lady's earned my respect. I gotta call you back. And I talked to you, and I remember calling you up. I said, Dr. Merritt, you earned my respect. Holy smokes. And that's when we really started fighting the good fight. So that's why we're sitting down today, because I think you just bring so much to the table. We have so much to talk about. I wanted to talk about, you touched on a lot of topics. The bumper sticker slogan, and just kind of the belief system, and I believe in science, and how we've been duped into this thing. Right. And so, in your definition, what is science? And then I want to touch on the virology, because a lot of the people that understand this, they don't understand the old tongue of viruses. And I want you to kind of elaborate on that for me.
Yeah. You know, what is science? Well, what science is supposed to be is that people are curious about the world around them. And so they make observations. And when you start making observations, then you kind of see patterns. And then you come up with a hypothesis. And the hypothesis is, well, okay, it seems to me that this is happening. This seems to be the pattern. Let's try and prove it. Now, one of the strongest arguments in science is when somebody has a hypothesis and they claim they've proven something. The strongest argument is it's hard to, you can add to that, but one of the things that is absolutely critical is there should not be anything that doesn't fit. If you find something that completely destroys that argument, then that argument's not right. Mm-hmm. So here's the problem, for example, in viruses, and this is where the average guy on the street, I think, has a little problem, because it gets technical. Now, what I've tried to do is personalize it. When I show you the lies involved and who's involved in doing it, it personalizes it to the point where you say, that guy, was he actually even real? But the bottom line here is, and it's a German, he said, don't call me a virologist, call me a biologist now. And it's Stefan Lanka, who was really the hero here in figuring this out. But he just showed that they never did controlled studies on all the things they claim prove the existence of viruses. For example, one of the things that they did, and I used to work in an electron microscopy lab, and this is one of the things that it's hard for the guy on the street to say, well, wait a minute, how can you say there are no viruses? We see them on electron microscopy. Well, what do you really see? When you actually go in and you dig into this and you look at it, What you're seeing is a tiny little blob, a black and white blob on a still life paper. And that blob is indistinguishable from what they call exosomes. So viruses, they claim, are little bits of genetic material that are surrounded by a lipid coating that fly around in the air and come in through your nose and your mouth, and you breathe it in, and then they get into your cells. They come into your cells, get into your genetic material, and start reproducing themselves and causing disease. That's their story. And then they say, well, there are also these things on there's these things called exosomes, which are little bits of genetic material wrapped in a lipid coating that come out of your cell and that are harmless or actually good for you, right? They're actually harvesting exosomes now for use in medicine. But the problem is, when you look on electron microscopy, they both look identical. And so this is like looking at a black and white picture of a guy with a little bag, a gym bag, standing in front of a bank. And you make up a story about it. And you say, oh, well, that guy, he's obviously just robbed the bank. That would be the virus, or he's going in to rob the bank. But you don't know that because he's just standing there. He could have gone in. He might be planning to rob the bank, but he could have just made a deposit and come out. Or he could have been going to the gym. You can't tell from that picture. And you can't tell from an electron microscope either. And what Stefan Lanka showed is that there are so many steps. And I used to work in an electron microscopy lab. You're dealing with dead tissue that has been highly processed. It's shocking to realize we don't really know if cell membranes exist like we think they do. This is really shocking when you start really looking at this. And there have been some famous people that have tried to make this understandable, and that they don't get published, obviously, and when they do, they get ignored. But there's a lot. I'm not the only one saying this. It's just that I wasn't paying attention as a physician. Again, I thought I'd let the scientists that study this do this. But in the process of getting things to the electron microscope, there's a lot of toxicity that occurs to the tissue. They have to culture this now, and let me contrast it with bacteria. People learn in biology how to culture bacteria. It's really simple. When I was 10 years old, I did this in my bedroom. My dad was a real chemist and biochemist, and he was a medical doctor, but he was a scientist, and he taught me how to do this, and it's really easy to do. We swab my nose, ironically, got the germs out of my nose. We put them on an agar plate that's sterile, and we let them grow at room temperature. And when you do that, you see these little colored dots. Those are the colonies of every bacteria that reproduces itself on that plate. And you can see they're different colored ones. And then you take one out using a sterile technique. You take one that's, say, yellow, and you put it on a plate, and now you just have one color, and you smear it on the plate. Then you see what happens. If they all come up yellow, then you think, well, maybe I've got one type of bacteria. Then you start looking at it under a light microscope, because we can see bacteria, and you can see, yes, they all look the same. And then you can do studies on them. Then you could do genetic studies on them. But unfortunately, viruses can't be seen by the naked eye. So you see, the problem is that they can only be discovered in their minds by essentially a genetic sequence problem, genetic sequencing. But in the process, you've mixed what you think is a virus culture. You take that and you plate it on an agar plate, and then you let it grow, and you do some steps, and you toxify it. You kill the bacteria, you kill everything else, and then you watch it for a while. And when the cells start falling apart, you just look at it under an electron microscope, and if you see these little blobs, you claim they're viruses. Then you do this genetic material, and you put it through the genetic sequencing process, and you claim you've got a new genetic sequence. But the problem is, what else did you have in that plate? Oh, you had dead cows stuff. You had tumor cells. They mix in all sorts of things with this. You don't separate. You're not starting with a pure culture of anything, and you can't, because these are not able to be separated by the naked eye. It's really, a lot of this stuff, and my big question, I had Purnima Wag, who is a longtime lab scientist, on early on, because I saw her on Telegram, and I had my friend trace her down, and it was amazing how quickly we found somebody that didn't have their name out there, didn't say, just said, this is all nonsense, and I've been a lab person for my whole life, and they can't do this. Well, she's right. And it turns out, but when I interviewed her, I said to her, I said, okay, Purnima, I guess I get why the big guys at Pfizer could lie about this, but how do you make such a lie understandable? How do you hornswoggle all the PhD students in virology? How do you hornswoggle all these university researchers? And the answer is, it's really simple. She said, this is all about money and about getting a PhD. When you're in a lab, you don't necessarily go back to primary verification of what was done before you. You know, all science is a series of assumptions at first and then proof. If your assumptions are wrong, then the subsequent series is all wrong. And they don't go back. These PhD students, they just want to get a PhD. They want to learn something. I guess they want to be useful. I'm not denigrating that. But what in the process they've done is they take their little part of the world that they're getting funded to do, and they do it very well. But they're not looking. They didn't go back in time. And at some point, I'll just say, you don't want to go back in time, because if you find it's all a lie, your whole PhD is a lie. That's a hard thing. It would be like if I were a pulmonologist and I suddenly discovered that everything I knew about asthma was wrong. You know, it's that kind of thing. It's really hard to swallow. So I think that's part of it. And the other thing I have to say is, in the old days, before we had government funding and all this funding, scientists just did it on their own. They kind of just looked at things, and they used their common sense, and they built things in their lab, and they experimented, and they did things. But now when you get funding, you spend so much of your time getting government grants. You'll have people in the department, that's all they do is write government grants. And then when it's all said and done, they give you a grant to prove, and a classic example is global warming. They give you a grant to research global warming. Well, what if you come out and after a few steps you realize, global warming's a lie. It's actually a misreading of the temperature sensors, because they're put into places that now are over asphalt. You know, that is actually a true story. So what happens if you find out it's a lie? But in the old days, when there was no government grant and you thought something was true and you found out it was a lie, you could switch terms and you go and research something else. But now you've got a government grant. And if you expose that it's not right, if you have questions it's not right, then you lose your grant. And you lose, and then your staff gets fired. You can't maintain your university professorship. I mean, the system is set up to continue the lie. I'm just going to say, because they only fund the narrative they want to be funded. That's part of what's going on here. And I mean, that's a big part of what's going on here. Now, the other thing, but there are simple things that could have been done. And this is such a brilliant about Stefan Lanka. What he did is he realized nobody had done a controlled experiment. So picture, I've got a specimen here, and in my right hand, and I think that that's a specimen of virus, of this new virus that I got out of somebody's lung, like in Wuhan, China. And I put it on a plate, and then I run it through this process that I've just described, where I grow it in an auger, then I poison the bacteria, and I treat it with chemicals and blah, 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 and I get to the electron microscope, and I claim I've got a new virus. But nobody ever did the controls experiment where I take a vial of nothing and I do the same thing. Okay, so now you've got two parallels. You've got the virus inside A and you've got nothing inside B. It turns out they end up at the same place. They show the same result. Because what you're seeing is the side effect of all this poisoning and all this manipulation you've done. It's an artifact. This cell death and cell damage and this little things that we're creating, it's artifact. And that's a really hard thing to swallow suddenly, but that's what he showed. And it's very convincing if anybody wants to look at his work.
Well, so think about the magnitude of this, and I 100% agree with you, Doc. I mean, just the magnitude of what you're saying, and and I believe this to be true. I mean, I don't believe in this boogie virus that it's just bad luck that we get sick and it's just a droplet.
No.
And I would tell people all the time, I never wore a mask during the so-called pandemic, and I came in close proximity with hundreds of patients every single week. I put my hands on them every week, and and I would say, how many people do I have to see and how many violations do I have to be in before this whole contagion claim is mathematically impossible? But I just want to just kind of reiterate, viruses, like the old tongue, is toxin, poison, right?
Right. That's what it means in Latin. They've been telling us all along. when they said, oh, there's a virus being spread in Wuhan and it's killing people, they didn't lie. They were spreading, in my opinion, a contact poison. Now, I can't prove this part, but I can tell you, in the bioweapons community, they had given up on airborne diseases pretty much. I mean, my understanding following it since the 1990s, early 90s, is that they tried, they did all these things, they spent lots of money on this, but at the end of the time, what you see they were really successful on was contact poisons and insect-borne diseases. There's no question there's parasites, and mycoplasma was a bioweapon. There's all sorts of different things that we've created. And there's no question that there are bad things out there. But one of the other things is, let's look at what I decided to do was let's look at influenza, because my friend Larry Pilevsky, who's a famous pediatrician that's been in this fight, he said from New York, he said he was one that went along with this no virus thing early on. And so I started saying, well, okay, how do we explain chickenpox? How do we explain these diseases? And we had these long discussions. So as a result of that, I decided I'm going to look at influenza. What is influenza? If we're not getting sick because of a virus in the winter, what is making us sick? Well, it turns out that in 1918, they actually, I spent a year of my life, I got an archive, a news archive. I started looking at original documents from like the Navy and the Public Health Service. I didn't trust anything that the AMA put out as their stories, okay? There's a lot of stories out there, and you can find them all over the web telling you about the pandemic of 1918, what it was, but that's not the real story. Mine is on my website, but if you go to the primary sources, what really happened was it turns out that it's an electromagnetic disease, and that before let's say at least 1800, before they laid down the telegram lines, people did not have a yearly flu season. Now, this should be a simple thing for our academic guys to understand and to look at. Why, if this is a virus, why did it suddenly start in modern times? Why didn't it start before the telegram was laid down? Well, it turns out that when the telegram was laid down, people started getting sick under those telegram wires. They ran them along railroad tracks. And so the train engineers and the brakemen and the telegram operators and all the people that worked under those wires started getting sick. And they discovered if they took a long twist in the copper wire, it ameliorated the disease. In other words, it may not have made it completely gone, but it made it so that they didn't notice it anymore. People weren't having the same symptoms. They would get nervous and they just didn't feel good. And they kind of like we kind of feel sometimes today with all this electromagnetic stuff. Well, then you look back and you look at, and this is one of the things I did, then you look at the British naval logs. There are people that looked at that and they discovered that when flu used to break out in the 1700s and 1600s, it broke out all around the world simultaneously, and it only happened like every 10, 20, or 30 years. It didn't happen every year. Then they looked at the sunspot cycles, and they discovered that those corresponded with an outbreak of burst of sun activity, that when the sun was quiet, you didn't have pandemics of influenza. And in fact, the British Navy noticed that this was breaking out. It would break out on a ship that was completely isolated at sea at the same time it broke out in Sydney, Australia, half a world away. It cannot be transmission by, breathing on people, because people didn't travel that fast back in the 1700s, 1600s. So it was something, and I'll tell you who figured this out by, somebody that the Christian community kind of loves to hate, and that's Helen Blavatsky. Madame Blavatsky was a theosophist and believed in, well, anyway, she said about this, she was right. She said, this is not like a disease. Influenza is not like a disease like any other. It's not like cholera or anything we can figure out, because it's global all at once, and it's something cosmological. Well, she was exactly right. It turns out that it's for the same reason that people were getting sick under the telegram lines. People get sick when the sun is very active, because and I wish I could show you, I have a video of how the body makes energy, but the bottom line is that when you step into an unexpected new electromagnetic field, your body shuts down its ability to make the kind of energy it needs to get rid of toxins in the body. So influenza just means influence in Italian. And what it really is that you are suddenly unable, there's a balance between the toxins you have in your body, meaning the poisonous stuff that you have in your body, and your ability to get rid of it. And if something throws that system off, you get sick. That's the bottom line. That's the disease. I'm coming out with a book. It's called the Disease Delusion. But that's the disease delusion, that we get sick because we get something in us. And my favorite example is like when you go on a plane trip, and I'm speaking of myself here. I'm completely guilty of this. Okay. You get on a plane, you're supposed to get on the plane the next morning. And as you and I know, in the Midwest, every plane has to leave at some god awful hour in the morning, where you have to get up at 3 or 4 o'clock to get ready to get there. And I hate that. So I don't sleep well the night before. And sleep is important for your body's ability to maximize its immunity, its ability to get rid of toxins. So I don't sleep well. Then I get on the plane, and what's been going on the plane? Well, they've been spraying it with these hateful disinfectants. These are biocidal agents, meaning they kill what they want to call pathogens. But when they kill living things, they could also kill you. It's just you're bigger, so you don't die like a germ. You know, there are bacteria and things, but they're spraying this stuff under the guise that somehow it's going to make you healthier. It's actually just another toxin that you breathe in, and you breathe it in as it's being recycled to some degree in that airflow in the airplane for the 2 to 4 hours to fly down to Florida or someplace. Then you get off the plane, and now you've kind of gotten a little more toxins in you. You're kind of sleep deprived, and you meet your orthopedic buddies that you haven't seen in a decade, and you go out and you eat too much and drink too much, and now you've real toxified yourself. Oh, and you have to get up and go to a meeting the next day, but you stay out late with them, so now you're still sleepless. And the next day you go and you're just dying at this meeting, and you do that for a couple of days. We don't give up. You feel better at 4 o'clock, so you do it again. And then a few days later, you get sick. And what do? You don't think of all these things as being part of the problem. You blame it on the guy coughing on the plane, because that's what NBC News told you is how people get sick.
Right.
It's just that stupid. And we need to stop thinking that way. We need to realize it's like a teeter-totter. And on one side, you've got toxicity, and on the other side, you've got your body's detoxification system. And if it gets out of balance, you get sick.
Right. And I agree with that 100%, Doc. I mean, I was always taught that the cause of all disease is toxicity and deficiency. Those two things combined. I mean, we're told that we're sick because of bad genes or bad germs or bad luck, but really that's just bad science.
It's really bad science. It
yes.
really, and let me just say, the other thing I've discovered in all this, and this is another totally not a medical kind of research I've been doing, but it's history. This goes back to ancient times. Alexander the Great, when he needed to get rid of somebody, and he was, by the way, not really, they didn't call him the Great back then. He was Alexander, king of Persia and Babylon. So, or king of Greece and Babylon. But he actually was a poisoner. He hired poisoners. They would kill off his rivals. He actually was poisoned by poisoners. Poisoning was a very big, and it was like a branch of science. It was one of the original branches of science. And that's why in 400 BC, roughly, Hippocrates wrote into the oath, I will not, I forgot this when I took it, but I probably just skimmed over it because I thought, how does this apply to medicine? Well, it applies big time. What it says in the oath is, I will not poison people, and I will not be paid to poison people, because in the ancient world, they knew that poisoning was best done by people that understood something about the human body. And those are physicians. So now we call ourselves, when we're in this business, bioweaponeers, but back then they were called poisoners. But it's the same program being run against humanity by the same people, in my opinion. Right. That's what's going on.
Yep. And I can't stress that enough. Like, think about going back to the 1918 flu, the implementation of the flu vaccine.
Oh.
And I got documentation that talks about how when the AMA had a little bit of an integrity, they said that there's been no controlled trials adequately demonstrating a decrease in influenza after vaccination. So why do you want to be a guinea pig experimented on? In other words, why would you want to poison yourself? But what I always say that these vaccines are, how do we say it? What the seeds are to the farmer to bring a crop, these vaccines are to big pharma to bring disease and profits. And so that's exactly what these are. And really, it's all goes back to, We need to, God made our bodies to self-heal, self-regulate, as long as we give the body what it needs and get away from that toxicity and deficiency. So what is your solution if someone, what would you recommend? If someone does get sick, what would you tell them, Doc?
Well, so I looked at influenza as the model because, that's what people say, oh, I got the flu. They always think I caught something. Well, the first thing we have to do is we have to change our language. You didn't get something, you got toxic. And so now let's figure out what's going on. But if you look at the influenza, what did in the old days when they were more honest, the individual doctor was not under the control of the federal government in the old days. They knew, for example, they knew sunlight was helpful. They knew that a good diet was helpful. That was one of the primary precepts of the Hippocratic Oath. I will prescribe for my patients the best diet to my best of my ability. So we know that we have to avoid the toxins, and help our body get rid of toxins. And how do we do that? It turns out, and this, I just interviewed Dr. Pollock from the University of Washington, really brilliant PhD guy who has figured out about the how water in your cells organizes itself and how your cells are actually functioning like a battery. This is how you get rid of toxins. Your cells actually have a negative and positive pole. Every cell in your body is like a tiny little battery. So when grandma says, hey, you're going to get sick, you're letting your batteries run down, she was actually right. And what charges, and he also discovered what charges that system is infrared light. Yes, you can do some with the energy you get from your food and other things, but it turns out infrared light is critical. So in the old sanitariums for tuberculosis, for example, they would take people out onto the outside and have them lay in the sunlight. What do we do with our people in our nursing homes? And what did they tell us in COVID? Oh, stay inside, put masks on, hide away. No. You have to have infrared light and near infrared light in order to charge that polarity. So your body actually, it pushes toxins out of your cell, just like a magnet, a south pole of a magnet will push another south pole. So if you get a little bit of Lysol in your system, this stuff you're supposed to be spraying in your house, which I don't recommend, to detoxify things, that's a biocidal agent. So it's damaging to you. This is all over nursing homes. And what happens is you get it into your cell, your body, your cell puts a negative charge, an electron, it puts electrons all around it. It's negative charged particles all around that toxin, and then pushes it out of the cell. It goes into the lymph, it goes into the bloodstream, it goes down into your liver, and it gets pooped out. That's how you get rid of toxicity. If you start watching your own body when you get sick, you'll realize one of the things that will cause you to get sick is suddenly you stop having bowel movements. That's one of the things that people can notice if they start really paying attention, is that if there's sunspots. I had this happen about a year ago last summer. I had about 10 people call me, and they were all getting sick and said, I think I've got COVID again. I said, no, you don't have COVID. What's going on? So I told them, go out and get some sun. I told them several things to do because there's several things we can do to detoxify. But the bottom line is I got it myself, and I noticed it, and I started having a cough. I started not feeling very well, and I stopped having bowel movements and then after I heard this from 10 people, I think I figured it out because I looked on the solar watch things on the internet, and we were having a big sunspot flare. So what it does is there's multiple things. Again, it's a balance between your ability to get rid of the toxin and having toxins. So what can we do? Well, how can we detoxify ourselves?
We'll be right back after a word for our sponsor. Today's episode is sponsored by Ezra Healing, a place devoted to renewal and deep-rooted well-being. Ezra Healing supports individuals and families in soothing the nervous system, releasing accumulated stress and trauma, and restoring the body's God-given ability to repair and thrive. Their method is gentle, discerning, and grounded in honoring how the body was created to function. With steady guidance, thoughtful education, and practical resources, they come alongside each person to foster safety, resilience, and whole person healing. If you're seeking a space to breathe, rebalance, and truly heal, Ezra Healing offers a powerful path forward. To learn more, visit them at www.ezrahealing.com. And now, back to the show.
Well, number one, sunlight is great. If you can't get to sunlight, infrared sauna. These infrared saunas are popping up everywhere. And my friend who's doing research on this with vaccinated and unvaccinated people's blood. She said, I don't think an infrared sauna is a luxury anymore. I think everybody needs this, because in the winter, at least we're in the northern climate where we are, because we can't go out in the summer. That's why we have a worse flu season than they do, by the way, in Arizona. We had a flu season when I lived down there, but it was much less because we were the sunniest city in America and people played outside all year. So get sun, get natural sunlight, fresh air, good food, clean diet. I like chlorine dioxide a lot. I always tell people I can't officially recommend this. I don't want to go to jail, because the government really doesn't like chlorine dioxide. But chlorine dioxide is a fabulous chemical that is not Clorox. It's not bleach. It's not anything. It's like nothing else we've ever seen. But it has the perfect, what they call the voltage of dissociation. It has the perfect redox potential, which is just the ability of the molecule to give electrons when it needs to it damages the bad things in your body, but it doesn't hurt the good things, because it's in that sweet spot. See, Clorox, hydrogen peroxide, all of those things, yeah, they'll get rid of bad things. They'll help with bad germs, for example, bacteria and things, but they'll also damage you because they don't discriminate. But chlorine dioxide does not damage your good bugs, your good bacteria that we all have and need, but it will help take care of these toxins. And you'll notice it if every one of those 10 people that got sick, I gave them this protocol, and I said, you're gonna know you're gonna get better. You'll start pooping this stuff out, and that's exactly what happens. So I think chlorine dioxide is something everybody should have in their arsenal. Lots of good water, and the other lie was low salt. A low salt diet is not what you need. You need salt. You need the minerals. Minerals are key. So probably the biggest deficiency that we have is because our soils are inadequate. They've been damaged. We can replace that. We can fix our soils. That's another thing we need to be doing. But in the meantime, we need to supplement the minerals. And I'm sure you've been doing that for a long time. But you need a balanced nutritional supplement that takes care of what we're not getting in the soil. For example, selenium. Selenium in China, years ago, the Chinese realized they were deficient in selenium, and they started supplementing selenium and iodine into their children's diets and their soil, and things got better. They found it made a real difference. Selenium seems to be some kind of really great antitoxin. I mean, it helps your cells detoxify in ways we don't completely understand. But it has lots of, treat your deficiencies, get infrared light, detoxify, eat clean, spiritual wellness, of course. You can't, you have to be connected to God and not practicing evil. But
amen, Doc. Well, wise words. And I want to know what this whole crave. I've heard Dr. Artis and a lot of other docs talk about nicotine. I know.
Oh, yeah. And I'm going to mention that. That's a great one. And this is why this might not have been needed a long time ago. Okay. This is not something that the guys in 1850 probably needed. Although it's interesting that organic tobacco, without the poisons that the tobacco industry put in it, has had a long history of medicinal benefit. And I know a lot of people now, this is just anecdotal, but I know a lot of people that either chew or smoke organic, homegrown or organically purchased tobacco, and it helps them feel better. They get healthier. But here's the thing about nicotine gum. Okay, and I give Brian Artis and those guys complete credit for figuring this out, because we heard some rumors going on about this during COVID that first of all, we realized smokers were going down less with this than non-smokers. What could that be about? Well, ever since I was in medical school in the early 70s, mid 70s, we've been examining these things called nicotinic receptors. And they're a receptor that's all over the human body, specifically in the heart and lungs. In the brain. They're very big in those places, but they're all over. And this is what the drug company, we also knew that the drug companies had been looking at these forever in terms of exploiting them for drugs. So one of the big nicotinic receptors that is involved in COVID is the ACE2 pathway. It's just a receptor that helps you maintain your fluids in the body. So it helps your salt reabsorption and things like that. Well, the drug companies exploited that to produce lisinopril and some of these other drugs to help blood pressure, okay? Because if you kind of block this receptor in certain ways, you can keep your blood pressure lower by getting rid of some of the sodium and whatever. But it turns out this is also, these nicotinic receptors are what snake venom binds to. Insect venom, almost any venom binds to these things. And we know that they can make you sick. So what these guys realized was that these nicotinic receptors are playing a role in COVID somehow. What if we block them? Now, why are they called nicotinic receptors? They're called that because they bind nicotine more than they bind anything else. Okay. And so I'll give you the short answer here. Actually, I already made it a long answer, but I'll give you the short answer, and then I'll explain how this plays out in the world of COVID, because this is really important. This is my contribution to it, I think. So they figured out, they said, let's just try this. And like Brian Artis told me, if you have somebody with long COVID, just put a nicotine patch on and it's over. So whatever it is that we have, and I tell people, when people ask me about snake venom, I said, I'm not saying it's not, but it's probably not snake venom. What we know is it binds like snake venom. So chemically, we have to, if we're going to get out of our crazy misunderstood world, we have to use the right words and we have to understand the chemistry. So when you have, if this is a receptor, let's say this is the nicotinic receptor, and this is something that binds it, this can be made of a lot of different things. That it can be natural, it could be artificial, but when it binds a receptor, it's called a ligand. So that's just the term I'm going to use. Whatever this stuff is that they poisoned us with, it's a ligand that binds this certain receptor that caused you to lose your sodium and get really, really sick really quickly. And they knew that certain people had very tight, they had very big affinity for this ligand and other people didn't. So this was a genetically targeted poison. And in my opinion, what happened was, like in Wuhan, when they said they weren't lying, they spoke the old language. They were poisoning us with a contact poison in Wuhan. And in favor of that is they just like your personal experience of not getting sick, they looked at 10 million people in China that were like in the household of a sick person with, quote, COVID, and they could not prove that one of those people ever transmitted it to another person. 10 million. How can that be an airborne disease, right? No, the people that got really sick in that first wave of quote COVID in Wuhan were people that probably picked up this toxic poison that's a contact poison. And let me just back up and say in favor of this, in the when was it? It was probably in the 70s and 80s that we were going down, because I think the Desmond Tutu Reconciliation Committee from South Africa, I think, was in the early 90s, and they discovered this and talked about it. We in America were clandestinely helping the South African Defense Force create contact poisons to change the to poison the Black community. Okay, they wanted to change the demographics. And so we were helping them, and we have evidence for that. I won't go into all the details, but we have evidence for that. And they discovered some of it at that commission. And it was very successful. So we've been working on contact poisons. Karen Kingston found patents for what's called genetically engineered smart hydrogel, which fits the point here of everything we saw in COVID. It's something that could be spread around the environment, and it's lipophilic, meaning it could get into you, get on your skin. You can get it in your mouth, and you get in it, and it's some kind of poison that gets into you, and it binds this receptor. Okay, it binds these nicotinic receptors, but it comes in two forms. It comes in a triangle form and a diamond form, I think they called it in the patent, and it's activated by a wavelength. So that would fit this whole thing. I can't prove this part I'm telling you, but I can prove what happens when you undo the blockade. So if I'm right, what happened in Wuhan, and then they spread it around in Lombardy, and they spread it around in New York City just to get the whole thing going. And this goes along with what, what's his name? Giordano. James Giordano is a scientist with Georgetown University, and he talks about how he could, you don't need a virus, you don't even need a disease to take down a nation. You could just do it by putting some technology out in 3 cities and then putting stuff on the internet to make people believe there's a huge pandemic, and then you mobilize all the walking worried to go into the emergency rooms, and then you relabel flu and everything else. Anybody gets sick with anything, it's this, okay? And then you have an artificial pandemic, which to me fits what happened. But what I'm going to say is, I think this stuff, this lipophilic stuff that they started this whole with, to a degree, it's still out there. Every once in a while, people are still getting sick with things that look very much like some of that early COVID stuff. And here's an example, and this is why it makes a difference, because if that's what was used and they devised these things to hit the ACE2 nicotinic receptor, then blocking it, what happens, the reason nicotine gum is a great thing, or nicotine in any form, but nicotine gum or nicotine patches can be done without any of the side effects of smoking. It's not, by the way, nicotine by itself is not addictive. That's the point they don't want you to know. But it gets into these receptors, and essentially the receptors love nicotine so much that they'll offload the poison to take the nicotine. So you're displacing this toxic ligand out in the world. Now, here's an example of real world practicality of this. I'll give you 2 examples. My friend, when I first heard about this from artists and those guys, I tried some myself, but I didn't see any difference. But I thought, well, maybe I just haven't gotten into this stuff, or I don't have anything in my system. And I have a certain bloodline that I'm one of the people that doesn't bind very well. So that's the thing. So, but anyway, I ran into somebody who told me, ever since I've had COVID, I've lost my peripheral vision. I can see central, but I've lost this vision out there. I said, okay, here's what I want you to try. Have you ever been a smoker? He said, yes. I said, well, then you probably need more than just a little bit. So why don't you get a 7 milligram nicotine patch? You can get them at the drugstore, and put them on, just put one on your thigh, every day, like it says to use them, and do it for a couple weeks, and then let me know how you're doing. Well, I didn't run into him for another month or so. And he said, but when I did, he said this, he said, man, I put that patch on. As soon as I put that patch on, my vision cleared up, and it cleared up for the 2 weeks I had that patch on. But as soon as I took it off, it came right back. And then I realized, this is why we used to learn medicine by example, by learning from patients. So anyway, I realized, okay, he probably still has this toxin floating around in the system. So he displaced it for a while, but as soon as he took the patch out, either it's still in the environment where he is and he's getting redosed, or probably it's just in his system and he hasn't flushed it out. So I told him to do it for a longer period of time, and in the process, either get some EDTA chelation or do something, flush your system somehow to get this out of you, and look around your environment. So the next story was, and I went on a cruise last February with four friends, so there were 5 of us, including my husband. And I told everybody, I said, my advice to you on this thing, this is our first time going out on one of these since the whole COVID nonsense. I said, my advice is, and I do this anytime I travel, before I go for a couple of days, I never have had a cigarette in my mouth, so it doesn't take much for me. I had to build up to 2 milligrams, half a piece of gum 3 times a day. And I do that for a couple of days before I go on a trip. And then I go on the trip, I take it 3 times a day during the trip, and then I do it for a couple of days when I get back, and I never get sick anymore. I just don't get, I used to get sick sometimes after you do these trips, but I don't get sick anymore. So I told this to my friends, and as far as I know, I'm the only one that did it, but maybe my husband, who's non-compliant, he may have had a little because I gave him some. Well, one of the guys, so 4 of us flew in and out of the same airport, but one guy flew back to a different airport in Seattle. And I didn't know it, but when he got back off the cruise ship, he got really sick. By the time he landed, he was getting sick somewhere between the cruise ship. We were all on the same cruise ship, but we weren't sick, and those guys didn't take the gum. I did, but somewhere between that cruise ship and home, he got into some of this stuff, in my opinion. So anyway, he said he got really, really sick, but I said, this is now 2 weeks later, I said, are you okay? He says, well, mostly. I'm kind of, I've got a little bit, just kind of energy stuff. I said, okay, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go down. I said, I use Lucy.com. That's what I keep. Lucy.com is according to the Healing for the Ages guys, they say that's the safest gum they can find that has no titanium. It's just a pure nicotine. It doesn't have any additives. So I use that. But I said, right now, short term, just go down to the gas station or your drugstore and get some nicotine gum, and start chewing it, and chew it 2 milligrams 3 times a day if you can tolerate it. If start at 1 if you can't do 2, but at least 2, If you need more, do more. And then give me a call in a week and let me know how you're doing. Well, he called me in 4 days and he said, you won't believe this, but the minute I started chewing that gum the first day, I not only am completely over what I had, but I feel better than when I get on the cruise ship. Now, what does that imply? To me, it implies that there's still this toxin, this lipophilic stuff that these psychopathic bioweaponeers created, and they being probably us and DARPA and BARDA and all that. They created this stuff, and it's now in the world. So it's in certain places, and he had it even before he got on the ship. But this has displaced it now. And I told him, I said, okay, now you need to probably take this for a while and make sure this stuff is flushed out of your system. Don't let it reattach to your receptors. So that's basically the way it seems to work. And that's based on my own experience and what they researched. And here's the good news is, well, because people always ask, well, okay, but next year it'll be something else. Well, probably not, because here's the beauty of this whole thing. We don't have the infinite numbers of receptors, right? The reason that all poisonous animals seem to use nicotinic receptors to poison us, if they're if they want to get us, if we're threatening their hive or their lair and they want to kill us as invaders, they use these nicotinic receptors, whether you're a wasp or you're an iguana. So there's something, we don't have an infinite number of these. So I think we've got these guys foxed. I think we can, that's why they're probably going to take away nicotine gum next, the chlorine dioxide nicotine gum.
Well, Doc, you made me a believer of nicotine. I mean, I've been already kind of leaning towards that way. I've been looking into it. So it's something I want to try. So Lucy.com. I'm going to have to go to that.
Lucy.com. And I don't get a kickback for saying that. I'm just saying that's the brand they recommended, and I did that. Now, if you're a smoker, you might need more than that. But a lot of people, when they a lot of people that ran out and got patches and put it on, it was way too strong and they got lightheaded and they couldn't tolerate it. You can cut the patches, but in my opinion, it's easier just to chew the gum.
Right.
My mother would be she never let me chew gum. She thought it looked very unladylike, so she's rolling over in her grave, but nonetheless.
Well, Doc, I heard about nurses in Europe taking nicotine and they weren't getting sick. And so there was something to be said about that. I heard about the nicotine a couple of years ago and was caught wind of it. And I thought it was interesting. And, I just didn't really think much of it. But the more I look into this, it looks like something that I might try just for preventative. And I think if you're listening, it's something to try. And I've heard that nicotine isn't addictive. It's just all the chemicals they put in these cigarettes. Right. So indoctrinated and believing that it is addictive. But, well, Doc, we're going to be wrapping up here on the last minute here. And I wanted to just give you the last word here. But where can people find you, Doc? And I appreciate all your wisdom that you've given us, and that you're just a wealth of knowledge, Doc. And we could just talk all day, really. And we just have so much to talk about. So we'll have to have you back on this podcast. And I just appreciate your time. So,
thank you.
Where can people find you? And then give us the last word.
Well, I'm at themedicalrebel.com, and I have a Rumble channel also by that name. I think it's The Medical Rebel. It has ironically, it has like a little DNA picture on the top of it. That's the right one, because there are a bunch of imitation channels out there for some reason. But anyway, that's it. I guess my last word would be that we're winning. I really don't be discouraged. Evil loses ultimately. And I really feel like the Great Awakening is upon us. And as bad as even this crazy stuff, the weather and all the stuff that's happening, we're seeing things that we would not have seen 10 years ago, in the fact that, it's like the control mechanism of this evil bunch is breaking down worldwide. And I believe we're just about out of this. Wars are fought in a very same way. It seems like they always are a very slow build up to the war, and then when the war hits, the war seems to go on forever, and then one day it's over. And I kind of think we're coming close to that. I don't have any dates, and I'm not saying that it's going to be just a cakewalk. I just think that the really bad guys are being, they're not in the control they once were. And that's why they've really done some crazy things here just to try and damage people and to make us afraid. But don't live in fear. We're not meant to live in fear.
Amen.
We're the great things is we've gotten to meet each other. We've gotten to meet people like us. We have a whole now organization of people. They may not be in your family, but they may be. You know, it's like-minded people from all over the world are taking back our world. And I think it's an exciting time to be alive. I think we've been in this war for 7,000 years, and we're coming to an end of it in our lifetime.
Amen.
That's what I think.
Well, God wins. He has the victory. The battle belongs to him. We are on the right side of history and the right side of truth. Dr. Merritt, God bless you.
God bless you.
I wish more docs had the courage that you have to stand in the gap. So I'm just thankful to call you a friend, and I'm so thankful for you, Doc. So God bless you. Thanks for your wisdom today. And if you're listening, please share this podcast. Go follow Dr. Merritt, themedicalrebel.com. Go support her. And God bless.
Thank you so much. Thanks for all you do.
Yep. Thanks, Doc.
To August of last year, nobody really knew who I was.
There's about 12 people who are producing 65% of anti-vaccine misinformation.
We need to come together as Americans and realize that we have a war at hand here. Right?
Like, dude, how scared of this shit do you have to be to be wearing gloves, a face shield, and a mask at this point?
Help us to urge folks and say to them, look, it's time to roll up your sleeve and get the shot.
Chiropractor in Omaha, Nebraska, responsible for 65% of the anti-vaccine misinformation. Put what I say to the test. Just don't write me off as crazy misinformation.
Doctor, please bring yourself in order.
600,000 people will die of cancer. 300,000 people will die of obesity this year. When is enough enough?